Now, my friends, we'll get into all the latest war whores stories. And again, the parties may change, the faces may change. White becomes black and R becomes D, but the agenda of war rolls on and on and on as the innocents pile up dead all around the world. Taking it from Danger Room, 60 dead as helicopters and drones strike Pakistan, but don't call it a war. U.S. officials don't like calling what's going on in Pakistan a war, but the U.S.-led conflict, whatever you name it, has never been this violent. The drone component of the campaign hit a new high over last weekend, 20 attacks in September alone, killing as many as 101 people. Then, last Monday, NATO confirmed that a pair of its helicopters based in Afghanistan chased militant suspects across the border. 53 more are now reported dead. In the Beltway, it's considered bad form to refer to the Pakistan war. The term's too loaded with geopolitical baggage and raises too many questions about who should be overseeing the conflict at home. But when NATO helicopters kill more than 4 dozen in Pakistan in a single day, when the CIA-led drone campaign hits 20 targets in 23 days, when thousands of U.S.-trained Afghans cross the border to fight insurgents on Pakistani soil, when American troops ferry aid to Pakistan's flood victims, when the U.S. Air Force flies surveillance sorties over Pakistan, when American security contractors operate on Pakistani turf, and when U.S. Special Operations Forces school Islamabad's army in counterinsurgency and sometimes lose troops to firefights in the process, what else should we name this multi-pronged military campaign? What other term would possibly apply? Obama's wars. Right here, we're talking about Pakistan. We've got tons of linkage in there, mostly going back to Danger Room, but also The Nation and others. But this segues into all the other related war horror updates. And again, it's always interesting when you have to jump across the pond to another country's media to find out what's really going on from your own Department of War. Pentagon to funnel U.S. arms to Yemen to fight al-CIAda. The Pentagon has proposed a $1.2 billion military aid package to Yemen for its battle against al-CIAda, sparking a warning from some U.S. government quarters that the extra resources would be used in the country's civil wars. Well, that's why they're doing it. That's how they roll. That's why Operation Cyclone and Brzezinski and Robert Gates and Jimmy Carter drew in the Soviets. Not the other way around like the story's told. That's why Brzezinski told you all about it in Le Mans, out of France. We went in first to draw in the Soviets to give them their Vietnam. So we fund these guys, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, for our short-term political goals, sometimes long-term, and ultimately it seems to be about not the Middle East. It ultimately seems to be about the U.S. versus Russia and China, and we'll all meet in the Middle East and destroy each other in this apocalyptic Megiddo, make it happen on purpose scenario. 9 NATO troops killed in Afghan helicopter crash. That's from the Associated Press. Bob Woodward now has his new book, I believe, called Obama's Wars. I believe we've covered in the past Bob Woodward and his possible CIA cutout role, in that he's there to give the appropriately leaked information, deep throat and all. That's why you hear more about Bob Woodward and you hear less about Bernstein, because, you know, Bernstein would give interviews to Playboy and talk about the media and the CIA having pretty much most control in the mighty Wurlitzer. But Woodward noting in his series of articles unspooling to tie in with the book Obama's Wars, going on the CIA's favorite newspaper, The Washington Post, with their Bilderberg Council on Foreign Relations heads, where they note that the CIA has a 3,000-man covert army in Afghanistan. Army reveals Afghan biometric ID plan, millions scanned, and to be carded by May. Mexican City aims to be the first to use widespread eye scanning technology. That's from allgov.com. The previous one, the Afghan biometric plan, is from Danger Room. And as we've noted, it seems that we've just sidestepped the whole fear about implantable microchips when they can just biometrically scan your ID or your fingerprint. White House disappointed with vote on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Yes, that's right. 20 years later, we're still arguing about this same situation. These are the cultural football issues that we all fight amongst each other about who should marry and who should be able to do what and what consenting adults want to do with themselves. None of your business. But it, makes for a good show. Former Marine Corps sniper and security contractor, a guy named Shane Schmidt, dies at the age of 33. And of course, he has interesting connections to what he has seen in combat. More on that from the Washington Post. Returning to Bob Woodward and the third of 3 articles adapted from Obama's Wars. The article is called Obama. We need to make clear to people that the cancer is in Pakistan. But as we just noted, don't call it a war. This is where we also got our opening quote, talking about General Jim Jones and Leon Panetta and their closed-door meetings with Obama about the war on Pakistan, about the war on Yemen, about the war on Somalia, about the war on Iraq, about the war on Afghanistan. Jim Jones said if, God forbid, the SUV had blown up in Times Square, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Should a future attempt be successful, Obama would be forced to do things that Pakistan would not like. Quote, no one will be able to stop the response and consequences. This is not a threat, just a statement of political fact. Obama says we need to make clear to people that the cancer is in Pakistan. Well, how do you do that? You've got to have catalyzing terror events. Despite Hillary Clinton pledge, State Department to pay out billions more to private mercenary firms. Change. That's a lot of change. Z has a lot of change in their pocket, which is why their doomsday, apocalyptic, religious, conservative, fucknut Eric Prince bugged out to Dubai, like most of our gangsters and boss hogs who have some millions socked away, and they've done their part furthering the agenda of the private military-industrial complex and the international banksters, of which they are the enforcement arm. It continues. Yes, we still do business with companies that get busted trafficking humans, get busted running drugs, get busted murdering civilians, get busted, I don't know, accumulating trophies of their murder victims. The aforementioned Robert Gates, the designated successor, if you'll recall, Google that phrase. Robert Gates, again, involved in Operation Cyclone, funding the Mujahideen, which would then turn into al-CIAda, which means the base, the database of Mujahideen fighters that we could bring up to use for terror events. Army's largest base, Fort Hood, reeling from 4 apparent suicides in one weekend alone. And our last note comes from this morning on Danger Room. Charlie Wilson's warrior becomes top Pentagon spook. This is a guy that was in the film Charlie Wilson's War, portrayed as kind of a little annoying pipsqueak, but here he's now been promoted high-level Pentagon. And of course it all ties in with the media and selling you all of these stories. Somehow we're going to try and blast through all this, my friends. Let's get our 9/11 updates, censorship and condemnation. Jon Stewart trashing 9/11 truth. You can see the photo posted up where he carried the sign on his show that said 9/11 was an outside job. You can dive in and do the research there on 911blogger.com and see that some of the main head award-winning writers of The Daily Show are, of course, members of the Council on Foreign Relations, private think tank selling Fabian socialism set up by Cecil Rhodes and his roundtables. Again, it all goes back to tragedy and hope. But this ties in with the pushback from the phony, left, funny gatekeepers. They're going to do their march, they're going to do their rally, they're going to do their reactionary reaction to the other phony side when Palin and Glenn Beck had their rally. But you notice these guys have no time for 9/11 questions. They have no time to get into the blank check that essentially leads to all the wars that we're still waging. Fortunately, Jon Stewart's book signing was interrupted by 9/11 truthers in the wake of his 9/11 was an outside job outburst. Meanwhile, Bill O'Reilly says 9/11 truth activists are dangerous radicals. Project Censored was censored because of their stance on 9/11 truth. 9/11 research was censored from the latest Project Censored, our local Willamette Week covering the Project Censored 2010 stories. Makes, of course, no reference to the suppression of 9/11 questions. Meanwhile, the New York Times lies about the popularity of 9/11 truth. The Wall Street Journal doing all it can to contain and belittle 9/11 questions. And then we get back to Operation Dark Heart. We reported on this story last week. Let's get a little bit more on the Pentagon destroying copies of this controversial memoir written by Army officer Anthony Schaefer, who has always claimed that Abel Danger identified Mohammed Atta pre-9/11.
Sources are telling Fox this morning that the Defense Department spent $45 grand on these books to get them out of circulation, and then they burned them. So what is it that is in that book that they do not want you to know?
And that is the question. That memoir record of one man's undercover mission in Afghanistan, and Steve Santani's live in Washington on that today. Exactly why did they burn the book, Steve?
Well, Bill, they say Operation Dark Heart poses a threat to national security. They didn't explain exactly why, but part of the book does deal with intelligence information that Mohammed Atta was identified as a threat to the U.S. before the 9/11 attacks occurred. Now, Atta, of course, was the ringleader of the attacks and piloted one plane that did hit the World Trade Center. The book, Operation Dark Heart, written by Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, he's in the Army Reserves now, he claims he told the 9/11 Commission about this early identification of Atta, but it did not appear in their final report. Schaefer says burning the book strikes him as retaliation. Otherwise, he wonders why all the fuss.
Everything we found was in the public domain in some form. The contention is by DOD that even if it's in the public domain, doesn't mean it's unclassified.
So a second version, heavily redacted, that is, a lot of things blacked out, will soon be published. Bill.